So Ryan, you recently had the opportunity to make a presentation to city managers on this topic, right?
Yeah, I was actually invited to a focus group roundtable meeting here in Dallas in front of several city leaders, and it's a unique opportunity that we get to speak to leaders of organizations and really kind of give them some information that they can take back to their cities, their organizations, and start some meaningful conversations. So I think this is probably going to be a really good topic for a new podcast. All right, welcome back, everyone. Episode 8 of Building Cyber Safe Communities. We got a little bit of a different platform, a different view. I like Mike's view a little bit better than my view.
Supposed to calm your mind.
We could all use a little calming in this cybersecurity battle that we're fighting every day. So I think the topic today is going to be I think it's going to be something that our viewers and listeners can take away back to their organizations and start some meaningful conversations, right? I feel like whatever we do, whatever we talk about, we need to be able to provide some value to our listeners. And I think this is going to be a great topic. So we're going to talk about 5 things that you as a city leader should be able to start a conversation with your IT and your staff. What are 5 questions that you need to be asking about your cybersecurity and information security program? And you'll notice I said IT and staff, right? Because cybersecurity and information security is not just an IT function, it's an organizational function. So I want to make sure we drive that point home. But question number 1, do we have an inventory?
Yeah,
And I see a smile on your face already.
Well, so you know that one of the services we've been offering to our members is we will perform risk assessments to get a sense of where they're at right now in their cybersecurity programs. And we use the CIS controls. Implementation Group 1 is usually where we start, where that's the first 56 safeguards out of 150 some odd safeguards they recommend. And they begin with inventory of your hardware assets and your software assets in this risk assessment. And most of us don't have a good inventory of all of our IT assets, and a lot of us don't have any idea what a software inventory would even begin to look like. And so, as a finding, we always give a report back after our assessments, and those are always the top 2 priorities recommended by the CIS controls.
Every time, right? It's
Yep.
consistent in every assessment we've done. And, it makes sense, right? We don't know what to protect or even monitor and detect if we don't know what we have, right?
That's
So
right.
it makes a lot of sense. So when we're talking asset inventory, you said hardware and software, we're talking machine names, manufacturer, model number, all of those types of things, software, license keys. What else would we be thinking related to inventory?
Well, for larger organizations, they want to make sure you've identified the data as the asset owner, right? Is this
Yeah.
part of this department? Has this been given to these employees to work remotely? These are the things that are moving around in your environment that you may not be keeping track of. And having an inventory will kind of keep you from losing track of some of these items. I know in my career, we've had laptops that have gone home with employees, and because we
Yeah.
didn't have good inventory control, we lost track of that asset. Well,
Hmm.
not only is it a valuable asset for the organization, but it has your data on it as well. And that's really, from a cybersecurity standpoint, the risk.
Right. Yeah, it can be a privacy issue. Laptops
Yeah.
turn up missing.
So,
I'll
so I
Go
like
ahead.
that
Sorry.
question that you put in your presentation, asking your leaders to go back and ask organizations, do we have a good hardware inventory? And do we know what software assets we use, which ones that are currently supported, and have any of them become, orphaned and are no longer under a support contract? Because if they're not, then they're not getting
Yeah.
patched for vulnerabilities.
Yeah, patching. That's a good one because, and also with software, if we do have a cybersecurity incident, you need to know who the players are that are involved in your environment. You may need to be contacting some of those, and if you don't have those readily available, that makes that process during a disaster, much more difficult. I'll even add one more to it. I don't know if this technically would be an inventory item, but what about user privileges? Making sure we track who has access to what, and who's a current employee and who's not a current employee. Would that be something you'd consider in inventory also?
Yeah, that's actually not called inventory in the CIS controls, but it is part of the first 56 safeguards,
Yeah.
is that you have a good list of your current users and that you have an effective onboarding program for deciding who has rights to what IT assets, and then also a good offboarding program so that you can
Yeah.
get those assets back before people leave employment.
Well, I'm gonna add that as 1A and 1B then, because I feel like that if you're taking the inventory, it might be a good opportunity to inventory your most important asset, right? Your people. So I think that's probably a good one to add to there. So maybe it's not 5 questions, maybe it's six, five and a half.
So you're
Um,
already edging.
well, we could do 100, right? I mean, we try to keep it concise because we feel like these five are relatively low bars to step over. There's not a lot of technology involved. Maybe there's not a lot of budget involved to be able to accomplish these that we're talking about, and they have high impact, right? So I think that's the main reason why we kind of settle on these five, which kind of leads us to number two. Do we use multi-factor authentication in our organization?
Right. I mean, you and I both know, and we've said in previous podcasts that MFA or multi-factor authentication is almost a default standard now, right? We're way past a username and password combination being enough authentication security. The threat actors are getting access to people's credentials. They're sharing them on the dark web. They're selling them on the dark web. And we're seeing business email compromise. We're seeing phishing attacks that are successful at exploiting people and getting them to input their credentials. And without MFA, that's it. They now can get into your environment and access your resources without your awareness.
Yeah. I mean, when we talk about this with groups of people, we always like to bring up the stat, that Microsoft talked about I say last year, it was 2023 now. That's 2 years old. But you're up to 99.9% less likely to have a account compromise if multi-factor authentication is enabled. That's a significant stat, and that's a powerful stat. However, we are seeing some instances where there can be some multi-factor authentication breakdown, and it really is a people or a process issue. But we just need to be real careful about when we go to a landing page where we're giving our multi-factor authentication token or that code, and who we're disclosing it to, because that's basically the issue we're seeing, right?
That, and we're also seeing that there are partial implementations of MFA in environments, right? And so I think in our previous podcast, we've talked about if you're just starting from scratch, put it on your privileged accounts, your administrator accounts, put it on your remote access accounts first, all right? Because those are the keys to the kingdom for your administrators, and then those are the most risky access points out there on the internet. But don't stop there. You need to
Mm-mm.
continue until you have MFA enabled for authentication on all of your systems.
Yeah,
We had recently had a member compromised. They had MFA in 2 out of their 3 areas. It was that third area that got compromised.
yeah, and that's what the threat actor will find, right?
Yep.
That one area where you've kind of let your guard down. So we're talking, email and collaboration tools, of course, but also your cloud environments, your VPN, virtual private network, your remote access, your admin users, of course, your finance system, your HR system, your payroll, all those areas that contain sensitive data, your backups, any area where MFA can be enabled should be enabled. That's
That's
that's an
correct.
accurate statement, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you need to have this talk, right? You need to have a roadmap with your folks and make sure that you understand as a city leader or as a manager where you do not have it so that you can focus on those areas first and make a priority of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, okay, so question number three that we should be asking our IT and our staff is, do we have an electronic funds transfer policy? So this one's going to be specifically finance related, right? But we need to have this conversation and we need to ask the question. You know that this is a very sensitive area for me, right? Because been with the risk pool for a long time, and I continue to see cities that get tricked into changing wiring instructions to send money to a cyber criminal. So, what are some things that we can do as an organization to make sure we're taking proper steps to avoid this type of loss?
Well, I think everything you said so far leads us to the fact that we need to have oversight on the process of making changes to our payment
Yeah,
information, right? That doesn't need to be a one person only role. And it doesn't need to be a privilege that's extended to your frontline staff. There needs to be managerial oversight. It shouldn't happen that often, right? But when you do get a request from a vendor, it appears from a vendor, to make changes to the payment process, in this case, your electronic funds transfer, then there needs to be some secondary and maybe even tertiary controls on that to make sure that that is an authentic and legitimate request.
yeah.
And one of the things that you've always recommended is that out of band authentication to make sure that this really came from your vendor and not a threat actor, and that your vendor hasn't had their credentials compromised.
Which can happen, right? It can happen on either side. I mean, the threat actors are monitoring our inboxes. They've gotten in some way, either on our side or the vendor side, and they're just waiting for the opportunity to step in. But like I've always said, taking that extra step to verify the authenticity of that request through an out of band method. And an out of band method means you receive an email, somebody needs to pick up the phone, make a phone call, outbound phone call only, speak to a verified person at the verified number that you've got on file, and make sure that request is legitimate. Is it cumbersome? Yeah, it takes a couple of minutes, but you know what? It's a lot easier than trying to explain why you just lost several $100,000 because we didn't take that step. So it's really, really important. And I'll also say that we do have a video in our library on our YouTube channel about fraudulent instruction and preventing fraudulent instruction, where Hacker Hank and I go over some of the best practices, looking at what cyber criminals are doing to attack us in this fashion. So this one's important. We need to make sure we have some controls in place.
Yeah, and this is the one type of loss that we both feel is 100% preventable if you
Yeah,
have the necessary controls in place.
exactly. And I think that's why it's so frustrating. And we're in customer service, we're in public service, right? We want to do the right thing. We want to take care of our constituents, our vendors, our employees. But we can't do it at the expense of not taking the proper precautions. And I'll even add, I said employees, we get a lot of requests from vendors, but we get a lot of requests from employees to change their direct deposit. So we still need to take the same safeguards and precautions internally as we would to our external customers. So,
That's right. It's a good point.
yeah. Number 4 in our list of 5, are we training enough? And I can almost assure you with 100% accuracy, the answer to that is probably no. The state does mandate, right? We all take an annual cybersecurity awareness training. Hopefully, you've all started that process due in August. Of course, the risk pool offers a free training for you. As if you can't get enough of looking at this face, you got to look at it for another 17 minutes, 18 minutes now in that training. But hopefully, everybody's taken that. But let's talk about training.
Yeah, so clearly we're not doing enough. If we were, we wouldn't have these compromises and we wouldn't see these losses that our members are suffering, right? I was reading some research recently that said that organizations spend about 3% of their money on training the human out of their total cybersecurity spend. And yet 85% of the losses can be attributed to human factors. Now, that may mean that the money they spent, the 97% of the money they spent, was well spent, and it stopped technically a lot of the attack vectors. But there still needs to be a significant investment in training the human side of the equation, because we see the losses are mounting in that area, and that's probably because the threat actors have learned this is one way we can get inside and we can make money off of these attacks.
That's a powerful statistic. We see it all the time. We know about 85% of the cyber incidents result in what we call hacking the human, right?
Yeah.
Human error. I used to call it problem in chair, not in computer, right? Picnic. Um, but there's some other things besides just awareness. We talked about the electronic funds transfer. We need to train on those processes, that policy, how to release and secure data, how to make sure your physical devices are secure. Locking your laptop when you leave, making sure that no unauthorized people are in your area. This is all training related. Simulated phishing, right? The phishing tests that we get, those are all part of your training program. And equally important because we talked about people, processes, and technology. Your people and your processes sometimes are just as important, if not more so, than the technology aspects. So,
Yeah, I think leaders can set that cyber culture and that expectation through their actions internally. You've got to make sure your people feel comfortable second guessing things when they just don't look right. But you've also got to start having these conversations internally to say, hey, you shouldn't be asked for your credentials by an external source. Or if you are, we have every expectation that you will pause and question that request
yeah.
before you enter your user ID and password.
Yeah, culture is a big thing. I think empowering the employee to be able to challenge those types of requests, to be able to ask those questions, to be able to push the brakes and say, okay, let's slow down and wait just a minute and verify some things. I think those are all really important. So training, that's an important one. All right, number 5. Do we have a plan? And I'm going to preface that by saying, and I mentioned this in the conversation I had with the group I mentioned earlier, and I put it bluntly: if you don't know the answer to that question, the answer is no, right?
Right.
If you have to ask the question, you don't know the answer to it, 100% the answer is no. So why do you think that is?
Well, it's because if you have a real plan, a plan that's going to effectively respond to a major cybersecurity incident, it involves your whole organization. As you've said earlier in this podcast and in many other times, this is not just an IT issue. Your response plan will involve many, many of your organization's resources. So if you've sat down and actually developed a really strong incident response plan, you would be aware of it because you would have been involved in that development effort.
Yeah,
And if you have updated it recently, you would be aware of that as well.
right. So yeah, that's a great point. Collaborative effort amongst all departments, because we talk about it all the time. A cyber event is a disaster, right? Just like other forms of disasters that we deal with, we plan for, and we even practice for. Your plan is not good if you've created it, put it in a binder, put it on the shelf, and haven't practiced it. And that's the key. As a matter of fact, I think that's probably a pretty good topic that maybe we can dig into deeper in a whole new podcast just related to planning. What do you think about that?
Yes, I mean, we've recently been involved in some tabletop exercises, and I think we could make a podcast probably very soon about all of that planning effort and what all that can help you learn. And we say it all the time, left of the boom, right? We want to do
Yeah,
these things before an incident occurs so that we can respond more quickly should an incident occur.
right. Yeah, the worst time to plan or to practice your event is in a real world scenario, right? So those tabletop exercises are very, very important, and we'll be coming around the state, right? Or hosting these tabletop exercises where folks can come in and participate, and we can go through some scenarios to maybe help them go back to their organizations and plan better for what we hope never happens, but we're seeing more and more common. It's starting to happen with some frequency. So
Yeah, that's why I love this presentation when you shared it with me, that these 5 questions I think are very, very important for leaders to take back to their organizations because they do several things. One is they help you understand where you have gaps in your
yeah,
preparedness. But the second is it also begins to share with your organization that you're taking cybersecurity seriously
yeah,
and that you recognize that the risks are there and that organizations just like yours are getting compromised, unfortunately, every day.
yeah, yeah. The
And then
threat's not going
thirdly,
away.
that you're willing to put in your resources into this cybersecurity awareness program to make sure that A, you can avoid being compromised, which is the ideal solution, but B, that you've given your folks the tools and equipping your organization to respond should that event occur.
Right. Yeah, that's good stuff. So to recap, and I'll put these down in the notes below if you're viewing this on YouTube. The 5 questions: Do we have an inventory? Do we use multi-factor authentication? Do we have an electronic funds transfer policy? Are we training enough? And do we have a plan? So we feel like those are five that are, like I said, high impact, relatively low bar to step over. Um, not really super heavy on budget, possibly, but do require some effort. And the conversation is what starts the effort. So we want to make sure that people have the ability and the knowledge to be able to take back to their organizations and start asking the questions and then engage with us, right? We can come out, we talked about it early in the podcast, do a cyber assessment that will help you identify some of these gaps and then help you answer some of these questions affirmatively, which will, of course, help you prepare.
Yeah, we can share sample incident response plans. We can give you templates for policies. As you said, we can do the assessment. We have many services that we offer at no cost to our members to help you put this maturity into your cybersecurity program.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Anything else before we wrap up?
No, it's good stuff, Ryan.
All right. Well, thanks, Mike, and thanks everyone for listening. We will be back with a new version pretty soon, and we're going to kind of take a deeper dive into creating a plan for, like I said, what's becoming more and more common amongst our members. But we need to make sure that we're planning accordingly, and we'll talk about that in the next series. So, thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.